Welcome to APA's weekly webinar series, co-sponsored by the Center for Campus Fire Safety, CCFS. My name is Billy Zadek, Standards and Codes Administrator for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA and CCFS websites later this afternoon. You'll receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. APA has webinars planned out through December 2020, and all are open for registration. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box, and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by the presenter. Professional Continuing Education credits, AIA-CLUs, and ICC recertification credits are being offered. For AIA certificates, please send an email to Billy, B-I-L-L-I-E, at APA.org with your membership number if you have not done so in the past. For ICC CEUs, if you are a CCFS member, please email Kathy at ctaber@campusfiresafety.org for your certificate. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Kathy to tell you a little bit about CCFS and introduce our presenter for today. Kathy, take it away.
Thank you, Billy, and thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to our presenter, Assistant Chief Richard Scott. A little bit about CCFS. We're a national nonprofit member-based organization dedicated to campus fire safety since our beginnings in 1999. We have a 12-person board of directors, and they're located nationwide. The majority of our board members are fire marshals on college campuses, fire safety educators and inspectors, and other board members are made up of international industry leaders. We're fortunate. We have a leadership team made up of well-known and respected leaders in the area of campus fire safety. Some of the activities that the center does, we have training programs from campus fire and life safety officials and for emergency responders. We have premier events such as our annual Campus Fire Forum, which unfortunately the one for 2020 has been canceled, but we're going to redo everything in 2021. So check out our website, and we'll let you all know as planning begins. That forum will be about the Seton Hall celebration of the Seton Hall survivors and how far they've come over the last 20 years, and also how far codes and standards have progressed since that fatal fire, or not progressed in other cases. As a member benefit organization, we offer free webinars, CEUs, discounts for training, access to an online job board, and ListServ discussions for networking purposes, et cetera, et cetera. So check us out when you have a chance at myccfs.org. Now I'd like to welcome our presenter, Assistant Chief Richard Scott from the Bonita Springs Fire District. Chief Scott is responsible for the overall operations of the fire district, including suppression, EMS, and fire prevention. He's been with the fire district for 27 years. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Chief Scott.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks for having me. And I'm going to try to take you on this journey about drug diversion, and specifically about here at Bonita Springs Fire, what we've done to prevent it, and some of the other things we've done to enhance our tracking of the controlled substances, how we secure them, and then I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more about our inventory system and how it relates back to the very thing we're talking about controlled substances. So when we started talking with KNOX, one of the things we identified as I talked to people around the country and in the state of Florida is that some people weren't exactly clear, and I know it seems a little bit elementary though, but on what drug diversion is. Plus, a lot of times people sign in and they're not in our business, so they're not always completely aware of what we're talking about. So I've been in the service, like I told you, well, like Kathy just read, for 27 years, and I have to admit, for many of the years, I never even heard the term. And then when I first saw it, I had to look it up, and what are we talking about? I understand what the definition of diversion is, but specifically under this content, what we're talking about here. So if you look it up under the DEA, and the definition is here, under the Drug Enforcement Agency, it's stealing medications. And the reason it's called, instead of theft or stealing, it's called diversion, is because it usually happens by the people within the agency. So controlled medications in EMS must only be used for patients in accordance with protocols, and the misappropriation of controlled substances by providers for their own use. And if you switch to the next slide, most of the diversions, again, happen internally. So, and I'll get back to this in a second. A few years ago, this became a much bigger issue. I'd say I became the EMS chief about 6 years ago, and about a year to two in, we started to hear a lot more cases, information about this happening internally. And it was usually people at the administrative level. They have the most control, they have the most access, they're the ones ordering these things. It does happen by the paramedics and EMTs, out on the field on the apparatus, but it happened a lot here. So we really had to take a full look at what we're doing and how to avoid this. And we didn't want to be one of those agencies that we play catch up. In other words, once it happens, and you heard the term, and you may have heard this in your own agency, well, we've never had a problem here. Chances are, because of what they're talking about here, more than 60% of 10 drug overdoses involve opioids, such as fentanyl and morphine. That's one of the medications, controlled substances we carry for pain management. Most agencies do. So as the opioid epidemic increased, as we've all heard in the news, and we know that happened, you may even know someone personally that's been involved in this, it became more and more evident that we had to get ahead of the curve here and take care of this. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So drug addiction can affect anyone. Opioids are commonly used by EMS providers, as I just mentioned. We use them. Most every agency I deal with or talk to uses some form of an opioid, as well as other benzos and things like that we carry to treat patients. So anywhere there is an administration and storage of narcotics, the risk of theft is significant. Now, the disadvantage that we have, and you may the same at your agencies where you work, or the ones you're dealing with, is we not only have a central location like you would have in a pharmacy or a physician's office or a hospital, but we have apparatus out there. We have 7 stations and 9 ALS apparatus that all carry these narcotics. So they're out in the field, and everyone in this department, at least the paramedics, have access to them. Next slide, please. So you would think the deterrent on these would be the things I'm going to talk about now, the person that diverts them, or let's face it, steals them or takes them. There's criminal liability for theft and other crimes. They can lose their license. If they're a paramedic, they would lose their license. They're probably going to lose their employment. And in the case of our world here with pensions, if you are charged with a felony and convicted, it's likely that you may lose your pension as well. So you would think that would be enough of a deterrent, but we found that it is not, of course, from what I've already talked about. So the service themselves, like us, you would have penalties and sanctions if you don't control these. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get in trouble or penalized or any charges brought up against you because someone does it, because they did it. But if you don't show due process or you haven't put enough effort forward to prevent diversion, you very well could be held liable, because we should know better at this point. And this is, again, part of the presentation today, is to talk about, where we came from, what are we doing, what's coming in the future, and what we should be doing. Next one. So the medical director also, depending on the state here, in the state of Florida, we have a DEA license to carry controlled substance narcotics with our medical director. So our agency, Bonita Springs Fire Control and Rescue District, and our medical director's name is on that license. So anything that would happen, diversion, loss, negligence with these medications, the medical director could also be held accountable for those things, and could, his license could be in jeopardy, as well as liability. Next slide, please. So now we'll get into the diversion. That's kind of what it is. Those are the penalties. That's what we're trying to avoid. And everything I'll talk about here forward kind of has to do with this. And I think that we as an agency are in a pretty good shape from talking to a lot of agencies around, again, the nation. I think we're all on the same path, and most people are in a different phase of this. But the more we share, the more we learn. So I talk to people today, I get questions, I get emails, I learn stuff that other people are doing, and we all trying to get to the same end location. So to look at the facts, and some of these we put in there, review all the data. We're a pretty small agency, but I think it's all relative to the amount of people or control you have over your agency on how many different apparatus you have, how many people have access, how many facilities you carry these controlled substances in. But you have to look at it on a regular basis. We look at patterns, and I look at usage and inventory of narcotics almost daily. And I'm not the only one here. We have an EMS chief that does the same. We ask questions. If anything seems out of ordinary, we investigate any deviation from what looks like the third one there. Look for patterns of narcotic use. For instance, if you see one crew and they're using, out of ordinary or more, let's say fentanyl or morphine like we talked about, and you see them using 2 or 3 times as much as they used to, or more than any other station or apparatus, that should be a real warning sign to you to dig into and find out why. It should be, what patient was it given to? What was it used for? There's more than one person on all of these emergency calls that we run. So that's the kind of thing we do. There's always a witness if a narcotic is given to someone. So there's a lot of checks and balances on these patterns to warn you if something's going on. Attendance issues, of course, if you see an erratic employee that's taken off regularly, used to be a much better, more dependable employee. And of course, this is common sense. Those things are happening that I just previously mentioned at the same location. You probably have a problem. We interview and dig into these things immediately. It doesn't mean anybody's guilty, but we get ahead of it when anything becomes up out of the ordinary. And of course, we inform our medical director, as the state law requires, to talk about any of these protocols and the system we have in place. Your medical director signs off on all these things, and we do these things together. Next slide, please. So some takeaways here, and what we're talking about to sum this up a little bit: control, limit, and monitor access to narcotics. So I talked about all the things that could happen. We're talking about how to solve this, or how to avoid it, or at least minimize it. The safeguards that are currently in place. So this is where we are now. I talked about some of them already. We have the MedVaults from Knox. It's a secure box. You're not breaking in unless you're a professional safecracker. You're not popping this thing with a screwdriver like the old boxes we used to have years ago. And some of you may remember, if you're in this business, it wasn't that long ago that we had cabinets that were not very secure, because we never had a problem. We trusted everyone. We have 2-person access or authentication to get in. So there's 2 entry points, whether it be a multiple pins, 2 people have to put in a pin. So one person with one code can't get into the boxes. They are tamper-proof containers. But again, that's not enough by itself, because everybody here has a code. Every paramedic here does have access to get in case they need these medications for their patients. So number 2, when drug diversion is exposed and reported, there are almost always coworkers that come forward to say they were suspicious, had a hunch, or saw some clues that something was amiss. You have to, encourage people to come forward with those things. I think this is out in the open enough now, unless you have 2 people that are wanting to divert medications. I would think, or at least hope, that will happen. But every single transaction, checks in the morning, any medications is pulled out of these MedVaults that we have, it always requires a witness. So it always takes 2 people to do everything. So your odds of 2 people within the same crew that are going to divert narcotics is hopefully greatly diminished. Make it safe for paramedics to acknowledge and treat the addiction. So I'm going to divulge some weaknesses, I guess you would call it, or issues we have here. Everybody has them, and we've had to deal with them. We have had several people here, even in an agency as small as ours, that have had issues with you know, with drug addictions and problems. And I'm not saying they stole any, but it's out there. It's if you think it's not there, even in a smaller agency, it probably is. And we all know this even in our personal worlds, from alcohol to drug addiction to other things. So if you expect it and know that it's there, I think it won't surprise you as much, and you're more willing to look and see the truth quicker. We do have an employee assistant program. We've used it, and we encourage it. So where we started, a few years back, I'd say, well, I don't want to even tell you because I don't want to admit that much. We had, and some agencies I talked to today still are doing this, and it's okay. I think that we just need to move in a forward direction to get to change a lot of these things, and technology has really afforded us the ability to do this. So we had paper sheets that were in the box where our narcotics were, and when you had shift change in the morning at 7 o'clock, a new paramedic would come in and they would look at the narcotics and they would sign it off to the next, you know, paramedic that came in. So there was really no control or real documentation here. These things were altered, things were omitted, dates were changed, amounts, expiration dates. Anybody could alter these things. There was whiteout all over the papers. We had no proof of who was doing it. This was common practice. And this is how a lot of agencies still do this, to transfer these narcotics. So all employees have access to these unsecure boxes. They either had a code or a key that everybody seemed to have because you could just transfer them around. So there's really no oversight, visibility, no real security. And as far as disposal of a level 2 narcotic like fentanyl or something, we're talking about morphine, it was, well, we didn't use all of it, so we squirted it in the bushes, or we dumped it down the drain, or there wasn't consistent disposal process to make sure we accounted for all of these things from beginning to end. And with the paper being the only documentation for witnesses, it was very difficult to really control. If we had had a problem, we would have been unlikely to find it. I'll admit that. Next slide, please. So here's the overall challenges that we faced. We have to track everything, and we use this term a lot, cradle-to-grave documentation. From the time we order it from our vendors, whoever we're buying it from, to the time it leaves this location, documented correctly. 2 forms of authentication, the KNOX MedVault or entry I mentioned, paperless tracking software. Disposal, we use an outside company that also follows the same guidelines that we do as far as the DEA, and they take possession and we document those things, and those forms are all returned back to the DEA. And you all know what I'm talking about with the 222 forms and things like that. And that's how we dispose of everything now. So it's accounted for from beginning to end or cradle to grave. And these things, hopefully, I'll knock on wood, we haven't had an issue, reduce diversion or greatly diminish. So here's where we are. I just mentioned we have a paperless chain of custody software. We document it time date stamps. It's got to be done by whoever possesses those narcotics every day. They all are witnessed, so we know exactly the time when they're done. The KNOX MedVault, also because of the KNOX software, KNOX Connect software, when that box is opened, that's documented digitally. We know the person that opened it. We know the exact time of day. So those things should coincide. They document that they're changing shift, transferring custody of these things. We can see that that box was opened at that time, so they can put eyes and do their inspection from what's required. You know, how much, the clarity, the condition, nothing's broken, nothing's tampered with, the expiration dates, and those things are all documented correctly on this paperless software. And now we know who is in and out of that box. And then later on, I'll talk about the RFID component to this, which we use this, and I'll go into that a little bit in a few minutes. We use this for our inventory and assets and all our medical supplies. And it is probably the final stamp on this that is live, real visibility, all of these narcotics, that if anything leaves that box, it's documented. And it knows it. So we know who has custody of it. We know when the box is opened. We would absolutely know when something left the box because it's RFID, radio frequency controlled, of what comes in and out of those individual vaults. So I can't think of anything right now. I'm sure we will in the future of how we can do any better, oversee and control these narcotics that we carry. And then, of course, I already mentioned the DEA compliant disposal company that we use. There's many of them out there. And I think that most people are using them now. You just can't dispose of these things on our own because that always opens the door for diversion and or questions. And one of my issues as, you know, the EMS chief when I was in that position for all those years is a finger being pointed at you or me in this case. You have control over those things. You better have a system in place so if something comes up missing, they're not looking at you. And you have some way of, you know, proving, you know, that you didn't take these things or divert them or steal them. So that's part of it too, is self-protection for our employees. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about our RFID inventory management system, radio frequency ID, and then how it relates back into the narcotics. So a little bit about our district. I mentioned some of these things already. We run roughly 8,000 calls a year. We have 7 stations. Each station, we carry about 400 pieces of medical equipment. That includes medications, equipment. That's just the medical supplies because all of our apparatus are advanced life support. So we carry everything a typical ambulance covers. We have fire engines and rescues, not ambulances, but we carry the same equipment and the same medications. Each apparatus carries about 160 items. And then at each location, like I said, we have a storage room that the crews go in and out of to resupply whatever they used on those calls. That's kind of how our system works. And then we have one location, which is here at our main station, our master supply room. We carry 2,500, probably 3,000 now with the pandemic because of the increase in PPE that we're using, from N95s to gowns to face shields and things. So we're probably around 3,000 items then. This is a little bit older. And then we also use the RFID for all our fixed assets. So everything over $750 that we own on all of our apparatus and in all of our buildings, we use a radio frequency ID tag. And that's about, at present, I think we're up to about 1,700 items now, 1,500 to 1,700 items. Next slide. So some of the challenges we face, and I'm going to say this because I know some of the world that you all are in out there, everybody has inventory. Everybody has to track inventory. I've talked to people that have called me about this that do lawn businesses. There's nothing wrong with that. They have lawnmowers, they have, you know, weed eaters, they have rakes, they have shovels, and they lose them. They have to inventory these things because it can turn into a large loss. So everybody has things they have to account for. So one of our issues when I got involved in administration was our oversight, lack of visibility. And one of our bigger problems was we, at all these locations I talked about with the 400 medical supplies in the rooms, our firefighters, EMTs, paramedics counted on them to go in and count these items. And I don't want to pick on them too bad, but they're not professional logistics officers or inventory specialists. They run emergency calls. They're out there to save lives and protect property. So the manual accounting was just completely overrun with errors, which causes, and I won't go into all the details, but over ordering, you know, too many items, ordering the wrong things. It was overwhelming mistakes. It was happening. The hoarding, because they had to move or go pick something up or call an officer to come deliver something, or they'd be out of service if they ran out of one of these pieces of equipment or medications. They took and hid and hoarded 3 and 4 times the amount they should have. So our goal here was to decrease inventory waste and time spent. Expiration dates was another main issue. We get inspected here, as all of you probably do if you run EMS systems, by our state officials, by the Department of Health. And it used to be we panicked about when we knew the inspector was in town because we had no control over expiration dates. So if you give a medication to a patient, not only is the individual paramedic liable for that and can lose their license, there's a pretty substantial fine for the agency, and we could also lose our advanced life support license. So it's a big deal. We cannot have expired medications and equipment on our apparatus or in our stations. So we found Silent Partners technology. We went out and hunted for a solution, and we found the typical barcoding, you know, paperless counting systems. It was just like using a piece of paper. You're still counting digits on your fingers and toes, whether you put it in a phone or a iPad or in a piece of paper. The barcoding was okay, and we all know what that is, but it's only as good as the last time it was done. So it's not live. We run, as you see, 8,000 calls. Some agencies out there are running 100,000 calls a year. So this stuff moves constantly. And, you know, looking at an inventory that someone did yesterday is almost useless to me today, because I don't know what's been used since. And then when I go to fill those orders, it's nowhere close to what the inventory was. It was such an advantage to do real time. So the RFID, when I first saw this, I didn't know what it stood for. I didn't know what it was. I am not a tech-savvy person by any stretch of the imagination. So I was overwhelmed and intimidated by it. But when I saw what it could do, it came to be true. But it intrigued me enough to where we dumped a lot into it, and not so much money, but just reputation. So Silent Partners was our partner. They've been with us ever since. We're on about 5 years now, and we still have a pretty close relationship. Software changes constantly. Equipment has to be updated, and they've been very responsive to keep us really on top of our game on all these things. So some of the challenges, and I'm only going through this because, again, I know the agencies, I know the world you guys are in, but I don't want to be misleading on this. You have to be extremely organized for these things to work, for the RFID to work. You have to package a certain way. Everything has to be tagged that you want to be read, of course. And implementing this to make it successful takes some effort, but the payback on it is tremendous. So it is a little bit of work in the beginning. I'm not going to mislead you on that. Next slide. So there's a picture of one of our rooms. And when I say organization, you see it looks like what you would think a hospital room or a pharmacy. Every single thing we have is put in one of these bins. It's labeled. You can't see it on there. We even put a label on the shelf, because we don't want anything moving from where it is because of the antennas and the readers and the tags. When you get it working properly, you don't want it to be adjusted. If it doesn't read properly, it's no good. We're probably, I can safely say, these stations that are set up like this, and we have 7 of them now, we probably read 98 to 99% accuracy. That means for those 400 items in there, we are usually not off by more than 2 or 3 items. And if you really think about that, that is incredible. The downside, okay, not the downside, the positive side, if it reads falsely, it just doesn't pick a tag up. So the worst thing that happens is you bring an extra 1 of something. It never underreads. It does underread, but you know what I mean. You're always bringing more. It'll underread, not overread. It won't tell you you have 4 of these medications and you only have 2. It'll tell you the other way around. There'll be 3 there. It says you have 2, so you bring 1. Maybe you don't have to leave it. So it never burns you that way. This is a real-time smart room, we call it, and it is live inventoried every few minutes, and it uploads into our software about once an hour. So when I say we have real visibility, I can look on my phone, on a tablet, on any computer, and see our inventory live, 24/7, 365, all locations, and that is pretty darn amazing. Yeah, that's passive tags, organization. You get the idea. But that's what all our places look like. We scale down things. You look on the left, if you're familiar, those are IV catheters. Everybody's had an IV in their arm. We buy those in boxes of 50 or 100 because of our minimizing our inventory and saving money. And really, we used to throw away more than 50% of everything we bought. So we package those down into Ziploc bags. As you see, the RFID tag is on the front, and there's 5 in a bag. And we may have 15 or 20 IV catheters in each station instead of a box of 50 where you put a sticker on the box of 50, because we don't use 50. So your need and your inventory counts is going to depend on how often you deliver and how much usage you have, how many calls you run. So we tailor that. We change it on a regular basis from season to not season to if a different district within our department gets busier, we can up those levels that we keep in there. But it greatly reduces the on-hand inventory that you have to keep at the stations, which of course saves you a lot of money and reduces the amount of things you have to order. Next slide, please. So this is just a real typical picture of the inventory and what it looks like. One of the aspects of it, it'll show you, and you can't really see it there, but I'll just tell you what it is. So each individual item has its own ID. So every single thing is individually identified. It tells you what it is. It tells you what station it's at. It tells you the expiration date and the last time it was seen. One of the typical things we used to get is I'd have a crew call and say, we're out of this. Okay, so the battalion chief or a captain or myself or whoever, we grab items and run them out to the station. And of course you get there and you say, no, you have too many of these, you're missing this thing over here. With this software, I can look on here immediately and tell them exactly how many they have, the last time it was seen, and what the number is on it. And by the way, here's your expiration date. Go find those things. So the manpower, the travel time across town to try to deliver, or we have an ambulance or a fire truck or a rescue driving across town to try to pick up equipment, has been absolutely erased. It does not happen. That's hard to put a dollar amount on. That savings is bigger than the dollar amount savings on the wasted time. Besides that, that apparatus is now out of service. And what does that cost to the public and the citizens and the patients that we possibly have to go serve? So there's a lot of outreaching branches to this that it improved our efficiency. Next slide, please. This is the typical, what we call a pick ticket for our Station 6. We set a par level at every place and how many there's supposed to be, how many we want there. And instead of looking through the 300 or 400 items, this summarizes what's low and what we need to bring. And that's what the number is on the top. This is how many you're supposed to have. This is how many you have. This is how many you have to bring. The bottom is almost as useful, or is as useful as the information on the top. It shows us what's going to expire at the end of the month. Remember I talked about the penalties for expiration dates? You can set this to 30, 60 days, whatever you like. Ours is set typically at 30 days now. But it shows what is going to expire by the end of the month. So that makes it ridiculously easy to order. I look at each station, I look at what's going to expire, I run a report on that. We order things well before they expire, we deliver them before they expire, and then when the crews need them, it's ready in their station. We even tell them what is expiring on their apparatus every month. So they can go find those things, bring it in, put these on the truck, we pick up the old stuff and we're done. So that's as easy as it is. The red, by the way, will show you if something is expired in the room. Now, I only did this for the purpose of the presentation because we don't have any more expired medications or equipment anywhere. So, but we had to show you what the red does. So we did stuff something in there. Next slide, please. So coming full circle back around to our controlled substances. Now we did I'll give you a whole rundown on the radio frequency ID, the RFID system, Silent Partners, the one who've helped us, put all these things in and run it. Now we're in the process of using the RFID technology in our narcotics. That's a MedVault. If you haven't seen one, the bottom medications there are the vials that we typically use. These two things, if you know about opioids and things, these are not narcotics. I didn't put them, I just used a regular vial. That's typically the size and what they look like. They'll have a tag on them similar to this. And as we move forward, we're looking at tamper-proof tags, which are available, so that if someone, we talked about the efforts that someone could go through or put out there or efforts they make to divert narcotics. So for as soon as I talked about this, someone asked me, what if they just open the box, rip the tag off, leave it in the box? This is a common practice, by the way, that we found that people do without the tag. They take the top off, they stick a needle in with a syringe, they pull out the medication, they push water back in. Put the tag back on, you'll never know the difference, other than they've opened it to check it. Tamper-proof tag would go over top of that pop top, and to be able to remove that or put something through it, it would alert you immediately if that tag is tampered with. So that would alleviate that diversion. So this really takes everything we've talked about with the MedVault being RFID enabled, and I mentioned this in the beginning. So it's secure. You need two forms of entry. We control the narcotics with the chain of custody software. We know who's in control of it, and now we know if it's ever removed from the box. And that should coincide with what it was removed for. Is it expired? Is it replaced? Is it given to a patient? Which also requires a witness and two signatures if it's given to the patient, and then has to be documented in that report writing system, whichever you may have. So that's kind of the whole system we have in place. The other thing, the DEA, I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about this. All these things we talk about DEA diversion. I got a call yesterday from someone. Actually, it was yesterday. I was thinking it was the day before. It was just coincidental that I'm talking about this today. they said, where, it was an agency and they were looking to move forward, and they, where do you find all these things from the DEA? You won't. The DEA still in meetings, they're still planning. I hear these things are going on. The information that we get is, I don't want to call them factual yet. I think they're pretty reliable because we get them from the Department of Health and people that are attending the meetings. For a fire rescue or EMS system and a mobile units like we carry, like ambulances or fire trucks, there's not anything written in the DEA statutes or rules and regulations. We have jumped on the fixed facilities, whether it be a pharmacy, hospital, doctor's office. So nothing applies directly. So we've taken all the information out of those, plus all the information we hear about there's being planned for a new release for our type of industry, and we're trying to stay well ahead of that. For instance, each medication we are hearing, they're going to want an individual ID on. You order fentanyl or morphine now, it comes in a lot number. And that's the only identification you have, the lot number, the expiration date. The RFID puts an individual identification on each individual drug, each one of these vials. So you can track one vial from cradle to grave, as we mentioned later. That's one of the things. The 2 forms of entry authentication, that's also coming. But we're trying to get ahead of that curve so we're not all playing catch up, as I mentioned several times today. So most of these things is we're overkilling this, but not just to stay ahead of what's going to be required by the state and the DEA, but it's also, again, I mentioned several times today, a really good idea to stay ahead of this so that you can prevent diversion and someone from stealing or taking your narcotics from your agency. So that's kind of that part of it, with all the way through to the RFID and all the pieces in place. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Wendy Fecto from Knox. I'm gonna plug one more thing here, and I'm not here to plug. I don't work for Knox, by the way. We're just an end user, and we've had great success. Oh, I do want to add one more thing, because I always get this question. When we put in this RFID system, we paid for the investment the first year, and we had over a 50% savings in our EMS budget. Just for those out there that wonders, well, how much does this really save? On top of the things I already mentioned about the deliveries, the time spent, the redundancy, the time your crew spend counting widgets, Band-Aids, so to speak, in their stations and in their trucks instead of training or running emergency calls. So I just wanted to mention that, because it doesn't come up that much. I'm not really here that much to talk about money, but it is important. We all work under budget restraints. It's all in our responsibilities to make sure that we're being, responsible with the money we spend, the taxpayer money. So it's a big stamp to put on the end of this, besides all the other things we talked about. But Knox, the KNOX Connect software I talked about, and I know Wendy's going to talk about this, we have recently implemented the Secure Key 6 program also for our Knox boxes in our commercial buildings. Now, even our residentials we're moving on. It's all in the same software. We've already got our new Knox boxes, or our old Knox boxes, in it. So we're kind of excited about that. With that, Wendy, I'll introduce you and stop talking. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate you being on the call today. One of the things I do want to mention after what Chief Scott explained is the MedVault and the RFID technology. There's 2 things with the MedVaults that are really important. Number one, the healthcare facilities that are on campuses so that they are able to track all the information. But the other thing you also have to remember is for any drugs that are confiscated on the campus, you now have a way to secure those medications or drugs as well, so that they are secured once they're confiscated. So that's another way to look at the MedVault unit that Chief Scott talked about. We have added a feature on the software of the MedVault unit so that you can get dual authentication on the software itself. In order to open the door, you'd have to enter 2 different codes, and that gives you your dual authentication right there. So we also wanted to touch base on a few other things, because the MedVault unit really is just one piece of the solution for the universities across the country. We're talking more and more to them so that there's rapid access and a complete system available to them so that they can resolve multiple solutions, such as active shooter, or ensuring that there's pre-planning involved in any type of situation that would go on within a stadium or within the school itself. So I just wanted to take the last couple minutes that we had on the call today and review that with you as far as some of the things that we're doing. Next slide, please, Neil. So as everyone knows, the unfortunate reality of today is that we have active shooters across the schools, whether it's K-12, K through 12, or at the universities. In the last year, since 2009, we've had 288 school shootings in the United States. And in 2019, there were 417 mass shootings alone. So being proactive and looking at how the first responders are going to enter the campus or enter buildings is of utmost importance. So if you look at this picture of the campus, you see the widespread campus and number of buildings. And the reality for campus safety is that there, in cases where multiple jurisdictions are going to respond to this campus. So you could have, for example, in Atlanta, you could have the Sandy Springs, you could have Marietta. So it just depends on how the campus is split up, where the campus buildings are. So multiple first responders may be coming. So we wanted to make sure that we looked at the entire campus and came up with a solution so that first responders could get into the buildings very, very quickly. This gives you an idea of all the different products that Knox has brought to the table and is being implemented across the country in the universities to ensure that this can happen. Neil, can you go to the next slide? So one of the things that's of utmost importance when you're talking about doing an access solution, so typically your Knox boxes or lock boxes are on the front of your school buildings, and you really need to have a secondary access point. But in order to determine what is really truly needed, there has to be collaboration, and that collaboration has to be with the school officials, all the fire officials that would respond to your campus. So if there's multiple jurisdictions or mutual aid jurisdictions, they have to be included in the discussions up front, as well as law enforcement. And the reason that that is important is because there isn't an easy way to do this, and you really all have to agree on how you're going to do this. The fire department does have the boxes on the front, but fire does not give police keys. They may submaster, which is what we do at a couple of the jurisdictions. So like in Atlanta, we have the Atlanta key that's actually submastered for Georgia Tech. So that's one thing that you can do. You can also do dual lock boxes, or you can do separate boxes, which is typically not the best solution. So one of the things that we found and what Chief Scott talked about is our new e-lock system. And we wanted to make sure to give you a couple minutes to see what that e-lock system can mean. So normally you have the mechanical keys. Those mechanical keys, in sharing those, or if any of them are lost, then you have to redo your entire program. So Knox took the feedback from all of the departments, whether they were university departments or they were the general fire departments. And over the last 15 years, we've been working on this to come out with the electronic key, which is in the center picture at the top. So the Key Secure 6 is what Chief Scott was talking about, that the department is putting in each one of its vehicles. Every person, in order to get the key out, has to enter a code. So that's automatically tracked. When they take it out, they have to take the E-key to the boxes. The E-key has to have a code, a key code put in it to tell that key whether or not they're allowed to open the box. So you could have one code for the fire department, one for the police department, one for Atlanta, one for College Park, one for Georgia Tech. You can share that code within 100 different agencies around to ensure that you put the right key into the right boxes. So if the jurisdiction handles the commercial boxes, you can program those keys just for commercial and program the keys for the schools just for the schools. So this gives you an idea of how that looks. But the tracking program, which is in the upper right-hand corner, really gives you the opportunity to do the audit trails. And that audit trail is the utmost important things because it puts the accountability on who took the key and who opened the box. So it not only tells you who had the key, it tells you where the key opened the box. And what we're doing with the schools is we're actually, if you could go back a few slides, I just want to show the blue box. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around. So in the schools, what we typically are doing is we're putting the standard firebox on the front, but on the back of the buildings, we're putting a secondary access box. This would be for active shooters, and when active shooters go in to a secondary location, what we're really trying to make sure that they can do is have under adrenaline quickly identify where they need to access. So Knox created the blue box for this solution, and it has gone very well across the country. It's something being put in place through multiple universities. so that if the situation is happening at the front of the building and a tactical unit is going to be entering, they have a secondary access point to ensure that they can get where they need to be. So this gives you an idea of all the different things that we're trying to do to bring a complete solution to the universities to ensure that you have a complete rapid access system in place and can account for anything that is needed, from the drug identification, from what Chief Scott talked about with the MedVaults, to the access point of any of the buildings. Along with, there's other products too that we've talked about in other sessions that we've done, but this particular product really enhances what Chief Scott talked about as far as having accountability, not just from the drug side of it, but also from the building side of it. And I think that's pretty much it. If there's any questions, you know.
Okay, this is Kathy again, and it looks like I do. First of all, thank you, Chief Scott. Thank you, Wendy. And Chief Scott, it looks like I got 5 so far. So the first one, how long did it take to transition your drug tracking process over to RFID?
Okay, I think that's probably meant for the medical supplies and the medications. The overall, when I was showing the rooms and everything, it probably took us a few 2 to 3 months to do everything, but we had to empty every station, kind of start from scratch, because our rooms were so terribly organized. Again, I'm throwing us under the bus a little bit. If your rooms were organized better, they have alternatives now. They can put antennas on the ceiling and run the whole room. So that depends on how bad a shape you're in, like how messy your garage is, right? You go to reorganize it. So to build your data list and all your assets, the asset took a lot longer. The medication one we went to one station, we could knock a station out in a day or two. And we were only doing this one day, maybe a day and a half a week. And we had, at the time, 5 locations, and it probably took us 2 months to get it all finished.
All right, and these next 2 might be a little bit similar. Someone's asking, how long did it take you to label and scan everything?
Well, the labeling can be a little time consuming, but one thing I can tell you, if you have 100 pencils, we'll call them pencils or whatever it may be, you have to put the sticker on and package them. But once you put the sticker on them, which is really pretty quick, then when you enter it into the software, you just times it by the quantity. So you don't have to do it 100 times. You put one in, how many of these do you have? 100. What's the expiration date? And they typically all come together and enter, and you're done. So the beginning investment, time investment is fairly big depending on how many items you have to organize and label and enter. That was the 2 months. On an ongoing basis, we do everything as it shows up. So, and we probably spend a couple hours a week on the amount of stuff that we have coming in to labeling and entering. It's probably fairly accurate for our size. But we have one part-time person doing this as well. So we don't have a full logistics division or anything like that. So that gives you an idea on the scalable, if you're bigger, how long it may take.
Another question that goes along with this is how much training of your personnel, how much of that was involved?
Really, for all of our personnel, almost none. Our crews, their jobs got much easier, as I mentioned in the presentation. They don't have to inventory the room. They don't do anything but go in the room, take the thing out that they need, and put it in the truck. That's it. So there was almost no training for them, other than try to keep the room tidy. And don't throw empty bags in the room, because the system reads that. Remember, it's active and it reads it all the time. The training for the rest of us, we learned as we went, and we have a logistics coordinator, myself, and the EMS chief, and it's really, we just got a new EMS chief, and I probably had that person trained up in, I don't know, a matter of days. Very easy to use. It kind of it takes care of itself. So it wasn't a big training investment at all.
And I know you talked about this, you touched on this in your presentation. How long will it take you to see a return on your investment? When will the program pay for itself?
Well, this is going to change from place to place. For us, we surpassed our initial investment in the first year. Probably almost doubled it. So, for instance, if it cost us $30,000, $25,000, we saved, and these are almost accurate numbers because I know them, we saved almost $50,000 the first year in our EMS budget. Now, that's with a lot of other components. That's, you know, constant oversight, which you're allowed to do now. So you can do just-in-time inventory. Order much less, you will order only what you need. And our waste is almost diminished. Like we don't lose or throw away or just anything like we used to.
Okay, we have a few more questions that have come in too. I'm not sure that we have drug diversion at our facility, but I'd like to see stronger tracking measures in place. What advice do you have for me to convince my management that an investment in this type of technology is needed?
Well, it's, I think, the penalties. Not only could you have an employee, you know, adding to their addiction, but the penalties if you carry narcotics of not doing your due diligence to reduce diversion, you could lose your license and put you out of business. You're not taking those steps. Your ALS license, your personnel could lose their license, your medical director could be, you know, could be liable. So those alone, those penalties, I would, you know, look into the department, the health department of your state when it is. Look at those. That should be enough. We're not talking about a tremendous amount of money here. Most of these software programs and equipment is not that big of an investment.
Thank you. That's good advice. Looks like I've got two more. How easy is it to navigate the program?
I think I'm only going to speak for myself. I am, again, not exaggerating here. I'm pretty bad with computers, phones, iPhones, all those things. It's just not my thing. And I navigate down to where I can track one individual item. I can tell you when it came here, when it moved from station to station, where it is today. I'll give you one example how easy it is, what I did. When we had the FEMA reimbursement going on for Hurricane Irma, our finance coordinator came and said, how much medical equipment have we used from point A to point B? With the software, I got in within 15 minutes, 10 minutes, had a full report of every single thing that moved out of each station over that, whatever, 3-week, 1-month period, before and the days after Irma. It was pretty incredible. So it's not hard to navigate. It shouldn't be intimidating. The system is, the technology is, but putting it in place and functioning once you're there is not very hard.
Okay. Well, thank you. This last question, I don't know if this might be for Wendy or you, but it's, how do you determine which buildings you use the Knox locks for, or would you do this for all the buildings?
So I'll take that one, Chief. For a university campus, what we typically have done is we've worked with the person in charge, and we mainly looked at the high areas like the dormitories, the science buildings, cafeterias. So the mainly occupied areas is where we start. But we sit down with you and help put that plan together so you know where to start. So we have an open discussion about your campus to understand that specific campus need. Every campus has their own unique situations, but we do have some basic standards questions that we ask to ensure that we look at the first ones that you need to have done for your campus.
Okay, let me just make sure. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Chief Scott. It looks like that's all I have for questions, unless anyone comes in the next few seconds. But on behalf of CCFS and Billy from APA too, thank you both very much for the presentation, and thank you all for attending.
You're welcome. Thanks, Kathy, for having me.
Okay, thank you. Take care, everyone.